have your attention, please, if you're here for this session? Yeah. I'm Philip Lutgendorf, and it's my pleasure to be in this role today. And of course, as you know, this is not a book launch, because Clouds was launched about 2 weeks ago, I believe, in Delhi. And it's like a ship, you can only launch it once. It seems like it's a kind of rule. So this is an introduction, and I intend to let the author do most of the talking. But let me just say a few words about the book, which I have finished from an advanced copy. Thank you very much, Chandrahas. Those of you that read and enjoyed, as I did, Chandrahas's first novel, Arzee the Dwarf, know that he has a wonderful ability to create very vivid and memorable and eccentric and rather lovable characters. In that novel, all within the city of Bombay, or as some people call it, Mumbai, and with a real kind of evocation of the city and a real feeling of affection for the city. So if you've been waiting, as I have, for this novel, which has taken a long time to come, you will not be disappointed. You will find more very interesting and vivid and fascinating characters in this book. But the canvas is rather wider, although there's still a significant part of it that takes place in Bombay, but it also extends into other places as well. Let me begin by...
Philip, before you begin, let me
yes,
begin, because
yes.
there's a separate beginning I have to make. We have been very good friends for many, many years, all of those decades. So all the years that I've been writing Clouds, we've had the chance to meet once or twice a year. And just as clouds begin on Earth with evaporated water vapor, so too you must know that literature begins with food. And you have come many, many nights to my house in Delhi for dinner. So as a little Guru Dakshina, I want to give you, it's a very humble gift, but you know, you're a translator of Tulsi Das, and you know that sometimes in very small gifts are genuinely human meanings made. A small sprig of curry patta from my back garden, just for you. Thank you, sir.
हाँ, लेकिन इसके पीछे कहानी है. Please.
आप बता सकते हैं.
There's a story behind this. So one time I went to Chandrahas's apartment for dinner in Kalkaji in Delhi, a neighborhood for which he has the same kind of enthusiasm he has for Bombay. The nights in Kalkaji, as he once announced. But he didn't have curry patta, and I happen to love curry patta in my dal. And so we went out, and so Chandrahas said, "Oh, I must introduce you to my sabzi wala, my vegetable vendor." And so we went down the street, and there was a telawala guy, with his cart, and we asked for curry patta, and he didn't have any, but he said, "But just wait a minute. Can you stand here and mind my cart?" So there we are. It's like 8 o'clock at night. Chandrahas and I are standing there in this gully in Kalkaji, ostensibly selling, cauliflower and cabbage, while the sabziwala goes away, climbs over somebody's wall, who has a tree, gets a sprig, climbs back over the wall, comes back and presents it to him with great love. And that was...
We try to help each other out.
Indeed. So I would like you to say why it took so long to write this novel, because I know it's been 8 years I read in one place, 10 in another.
Well, it's taken 8 years, that's true, but one of the strange things about writing novels is all the years writing them can be excruciatingly painful, but the day it comes out, it's all worth it. And 2 weeks ago, I woke up one morning and saw hanging on top of my bookcase that there were 100,000 words more of me in the world than existed the week before. So that was very pleasing. The reason why it took so long was that I was trying to write a story that never seemed quite properly balanced. You've reread it, it's a double-sided story. It's about the private life of men and women on the one side and the public life of men and women in India on the other. And somewhat like that story about the three monkeys trying to bite off little bits to make everything equal. I've never felt that the two stories were perfectly balanced. And in writing them, I also had to do some new kinds of living. You know, like a lot of other Indian writers in English, I sort of grew up middle class and very protected. And at some point, I realized I could not watch the time anymore. I had to gather a set of experiences first, and the book, in some way I felt the book didn't really matter so much as doing the living that was required for the book. And in the process of writing it, I learned a lot of things about Hinduism, for instance, a passion that you and I both share for trying to work out the narrative structures of Hinduism, how it is lived in a daily, on an everyday life in India. So learning all that took time, and finally when it was done, that's when the pleasure begins, when you revise, cut, polish, and make it all into a shape that you hope will endure.
I should add to what I said earlier that besides the vivid characters and the setting, there's a combination of really considerable humor in the book, along with some really quite profound reflections and very lyrical passages as well. One thing I would like to ask you, to use a 100 rupee word, it occurs to me that this is a kind of a metafiction in some ways, in that which is to say a book that is reflecting on fiction writing. There's quite a bit of that in the story, and there's even a cameo appearance by a famous novelist, not him, Amitav Ghosh, at one point in doing a book launch in Bombay. So I wondered if you'd like to comment on this kind of meta.
If I may very quickly sketch out the structure, the book is a double-sided story. On the one side, it tells a story of a recently divorced Parsi psychotherapist, Farhad Billim, who, after trying unsuccessfully to find romance in Bombay for 2 years, realizes that India is not a good place to fall in love in your 40s. There does not seem to be much room for that. And he decides to go to America, where it seems to him that love can flow in abundance. So that's one side, that's a more comic side of the book. And the other side is about two old Oria Brahmins. I come from Odisha, a state in the east of India. Two old Oria Brahmins who have arrived in Bombay for a certain operation and who cannot go home, although they yearn to go home. And they have as their caretaker a young tribal boy called Rabi, who they pay no attention to because they feel that having come of age in another time, even before independence in India, they have that old view of upper caste and upper class Indians that people are very poor, or people have no education, do not have much of a personality and have nothing to say. So they treat him like a servant, when actually this young boy is a political activist and is engaged in a very interesting fight for democracy in South Odisha.
Yeah.
Within that, I felt within this material there was lots of room to play around with stuff, and I think the reason why there's so many books in clouds is that in the last century in India, Indian history has changed faster than it ever has in the past, and part of that reason is that books can change somebody's mind. And many characters in the books, in the novel, have a different view of reading. Eeja, the old man, loves ancient Sanskrit literature, and that's part of the beauty of his mind. Hemlata, who is one of the people Farhad falls in love with, is a professor of English literature who's writing a book about marriage and whether marriage is actually not a conservative step. It always was something conservative. It was linked to land, title, wealth. But in the 21st century, when love is free, is marriage actually that has the meaning of that change and has become actually the most radical thing you can do to show that you love another person, not the most conservative.
She likes Gayatri Spivak. So bring in another book.
I felt, and I don't know whether this has ever happened to you, Philip G, but a book launch is an extremely good place to go on a first date. If things don't work out, you can always blame the writer. So there is a scene in that where they go to an Amitav Ghosh book launch where Farhad gets a chance to be a little bit of a hero, and he's even jealous of Amitav Ghosh because a writer has a public personality, whereas if you're a psychotherapist, all your successful experiences take place in private and you're not allowed to speak about them.
Did you sort of have to become an ethnographer in looking at the Parsi community as well as the tribal community? in Odisha that you...
Well, because India is so very diverse, I think the Indian novelist has a duty to represent people other than his own set, whether that's class, religion, or whatever. And in particular, I wanted to set up the issue of mining, politics, and human rights in South Odisha, which is what part of the story is about, as a kind of secret clash between Hinduism, which has right of way, if you like, in Indian life, and especially today, and the cloud religion, the religion of these tribal people who over hundreds of years have formed a philosophy based entirely on a god called Cloudmaker, who has no fixed shape, unlike the Hindu gods, and who, when he plays in the skies, takes new form every moment and cannot bear to be still. So, sometimes in writing novels about politics, it's important not just to write a documentary record, because that is already being done very well by Indian journalists. A lot of very, very brave, very good Indian writers. I felt it would make more interesting for readers to find something new in it, and through that go back to things that might already know, which is the cloud religion.
What about the Parsis? I happen to have a lot of Parsi friends.
Yes.
I liked the atmosphere of Parsi culture that you created in the book.
Well, India is a country of minorities, one might say, and among those minorities, as Farhad says at one point, the Parsis are a especially minor minority. Yes.
There's
only 8,000 or 9,000 of them, and there is something, Parsi culture is unusually vivid in India, let's say, and of course there is this, it links back to Persia, and there's a scene in the book where Farhad and his date, who's also this Parsi girl, do you think shall I read for 2 minutes?
Yes,
and then,
why don't you do that?
It may be that all these words I'm saying about my words turn out to be an exaggerated description, and it's not as good as I think it is, so we must find out.
Do people want Q&A? I mean, we only have a half-hour session, so do people want to ask Chandrahas questions?
Yes.
Can you not hear me? Oh, it's him. Slow down.
Farhad on his way to Udvada. Of all the minorities in this country, where even the minorities are in multitudes, we Parsis must be the smallest. There were never any more than a few thousand of us to begin with, and now, beyond the fringes of Bombay, which we more or less made, even if the Marathas won't allow for it now, and the towns of coastal Gujarat, we don't even get up to 100 in any place. A family emigrating to New York or Toronto, a nasty car accident, 2 Parsi women marrying outside the faith, and Parsi demographics must be done all over again. Up in Delhi, even a single man and his dog are a Parsi mob. At our very own weddings and navjots, we are outnumbered by non-Parsi spouses, children, waiters, by the rest of Indian civilization, each one perfectly programmed to proliferate. Somehow, we have managed to gratify ourselves with daily infusions of fried eggs when the rest of India likes them fertilized. Just by leaving for San Francisco on Monday night, I'd probably be tilting the scale somewhere. Possibly more Parsi men in Bombay would now be gay than not, or would live with their mothers than not. Never a great patron of the faith, I had always stood, from the time I stumbled awkwardly into adulthood, at a safe distance from the institutions of our community. And later, psychotherapy had estranged me further from groupthink. It annoyed me that because of our declining numbers, the elders of the faith kept insisting that we all had to hold together. Past the doomsday bluster, they seemed to actually love the fact that there was a crisis and they were in charge of rules, prescriptions, and remedies. In my head, I was a Billimoria first, a Bombayite second, and a Parsi fourth. Fifth, if you ask, what's third?
You asked me, about the structure of the book. This is a passage where one of the principal narrators, of course, is talking, but actually, much of the book is dialogue. And I wanted to ask you about your choice to structure it that way. Much of it is conversations between people.
Some people said to me that this book is 1.5 times longer than my first novel, but there's less things happening in it than there is in Arzee the Dwarf. And my answer to that was that actually this is a book, a lot of it is about conversations. And if you, for instance, were to compare, the first time I went to America, American democracy has many flaws, but one of the nice things I always find about that is that you can set up a chat with anybody you meet on the street. There's that sense that being part of a society must mean that you must be able to speak to each other as men and women, as people from higher or lower classes. And in India, really, that's not the case, and that's one of the things missing about Indian democracy today, which is why I think Indian democracy is much too formal. It's much too vested in elections, in political parties. And for that to change, for that cynicism to change, it means that Indians today must find ways and means of making bonds between one another. And that includes aspects of gender politics or religious politics. And the other thing is, a lot of the scenes in this book are written in real time. There's no cuts in them, and they're about people who do not know each other finding something out about each other. Farhad on his different dates, Eeja and I speaking to each other. And I felt they would become more interesting if readers were part of that encounter. As a reader of a novel, the characters don't know you're there. And I also like other novelists who don't explain a lot. There's a lot you can find out about human beings just by watching them talk, and that's what I wanted to do in the book as well. And when after all that you find somebody changing their mind, I think that in novels is a very nice place. When you already feel that there's 200 pages or 100 pages previously, they would not have said what they're doing now.
One of the intimidating things about interviewing Chandrahas is that he is known here at JLF as one of the great interviewers. So I've been sort of scared of this. But let me ask you about do you have a favorite scene with the oria characters that you would like to share, or am I putting you on too much on the spot here?
No, I found this, writing this part of the book more fun actually, because the book is a study of the private life of human beings, but that's the Farhad side, and Farhad, Himlata and Zahra are seen always going around the city, so it's kind of horizontal view of Bombay in a way. And the story that's more about the history of Indian history and Indian democracies all takes place in a single room. So the bit about the private life of man takes place in public, and the bit about Indian history takes place in one small room. And what I really enjoyed was trying to make the story go backward and forward at the same time. And the bits I enjoyed writing the most, when you write novels, your job is to make characters and believable characters, but every once in a while you get a chance to make a new god. And in this case, it was being able to write the story of Cloudmaker. So maybe I'm going to read a bit, 2 or 3 paragraphs about the birth of Cloudmaker. At the beginning of time, with the union of the wind and the mountain, a son was born, a child neither of the earth nor of the sky, but somewhere in between. Nothing like him had ever been seen in the universe, neither this nor that. He was called Cloudmaker. Cloudmaker was never still, and no shape he took lasted more than a few minutes. His nature was movement like the wind or like a song. He was always at play in this world, so beautiful to begin with, and now even more so when he loped and twisted in the wide open sky, puffing himself up into clouds. But Cloudmaker never knew what his limits were. In this, he was like the beings he would later create. He was both wise and foolish, generous and greedy, like man. An only child, he soon longed for a kingdom different from that of his parents, for something that was his own work. One day, when he was not yet fully grown, he happened to bind together into a loose figure some stones from a paste of mud, straw, leaves, and rain, and he carried it around with him within a grey, wet, nourishing cloud. A few months later, he was astonished to see the figure had come to life. Delighted, he set his creation down to walk on the earth as man. The old lady murmured, "When man always comes from a woman's womb, why then in all the stories of creation do men keep emerging out of all sorts of other places?" I ignored her and continued. But then Cloudmaker saw that man too would be lonely like he was if he had the earth all to himself. And so he made a woman with a slightly smaller boulder he saw nearby and what was left of the paste. He was delighted with his work, as was man. He set man and woman to work to play, somewhat bound, somewhat free, right at the foot of the mountain, so he could always watch them. In the meantime, when they found out what he had done, Cloudmaker's parents flew into a terrible rage, for it seemed that he might in time flood the entire world, not just with his clouds, but with his men. His parents wanted the world to remain silent and serene forever, just as it was at the time. And so they devised a terrible punishment. They cursed him that he would never grow up and always remain the same, a playful child, and that he would never find a partner or companion in the universe but remain alone. And they declared too that Cloudmaker's men and women would live only a little time on this world before their bodies would turn back to dust and mud, that for all their happiness in this world, they would suffer terribly from disease, pain, and death. How harsh, how cruel, the old man murmured. All gods must have their consorts and companions. Shiva has Parvati, Ram has Sita. If this puffing, lonely, childish fellow is your god, no wonder you tribal people are so slow and so moody. His wife sighed and said, "Ah, poor cloudy maker, without a wife in this world, just like my son."
Yeah. Good. I think if there are questions or comments from the audience, I know that you haven't read the novel yet because it's just out, right? But maybe based on the first novel, if anyone's. Can you speak up, or can someone give a mic? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just asking from curiosity. I was just listening for the first time what you are saying here. The Cloudmaker which you are referring here is referring to God Brahma, some sort of like that.
I didn't get your question.
The Cloudmaker which you are referring to here, does it refers to somewhere like God Brahma or so?
No. In fact, I don't think so. We can use another religious frame for reference. It is an invented story for the book.
Okay.
Was it based at all on tribal, any tribal groups in Odisha?
No, I made it up partly because, Philipji, we have a sun god, a moon god, all kinds of gods. I felt there was kind of like a missing place in the pantheon. And India, has a special relationship to clouds. For us, clouds are not, in the West, they're often linked to negative states.
Right.
In India, we look forward to the coming of dark clouds, and clouds are associated with romance, with love, with song. So I felt this was a nice place. When you write stories you write about characters, you must also find motifs that work for the book.
Right.
And in this case, I felt clouds was good. On the tribal side, it was this religion. And on the Farhad side, I've always felt this, when you look at clouds, and this is one experience of beauty that connects us with the oldest human beings. So this is a continuous line, an ecological or meteorological line in the human story. When you look at clouds, there's something about them that seems to you reminiscent of thought itself, the nature of thought. There's something inexhaustible and a super abundance about human thought, and it is curiously directionless. It sort of just drifts from one thing to another. And I felt this was an interesting metaphor that you could put it to use in two different ways in the same story.
I've been fortunate to spend a good deal of time in the mountains, both here in India and also in the US. And mountains do make clouds,
yes.
and or clouds make themselves above mountains. So I like the image very much because this is a mountain, a sacred mountain, and these clouds are continually forming above it. Let me ask you a final question.
There's a gentleman.
Good, better. Give a mic, please.
Is this based on the Niyamagiri movement in Odisha?
You could say it is. It describes a story that's similar about a certain kind of people trying to reclaim the land from a mining company. The bones of the story are the same. But actually, sir, the story I wanted to write, I mean, I went, it's not exactly Niyamgiri. There are other parts in Odisha where mining companies have taken over land of tribals. But when I went traveling to these places, actually, the story, it seems to us a very negative, a very cruel, a very harsh story. And but I found that what we think of as tribal culture or tribal rights, what they want, there's many versions of that today. And there are many tribal people who want to accept this deal. They want to enter history. They want a satellite dish above their houses. So the story is more complicated than it appears. And two, I found many young tribal people who were able to speak the language of democracy and human rights. They weren't just saying we are somebody poor, defenseless, who need somebody to take care of us.
Right.
So in a way, as one of the characters in the book says, this is the chance, it's a kind of opportunity given by history to make your place. Because India is strange in one particular way. Indian democracy was also kind of imposed from above in the 1940s. And one day we woke up to find out that we are democracy. And while many good things have happened in our country because of that, this language has to be reinvented all the time by new parts of society, as it was with the Dalit revolution. And unless that is the case, democracy becomes a bit stale, as it has in the world today, I feel, with a lot of very clever people have worked out how to rig the system. So unless we can make democracy ecstatic again, to find, to give a kind of religious ecstasy to the secular, in a way, I don't think that even Indian democracy has a chance, and this is India's great opportunity to give something to the world, to reinvent democracy, and it comes out of places like that. So although I wanted to write a documentary story about the Niyamgiri, there's more to it than that.
Anybody else? Well, let me end by asking you this. As in Arzee the Dwarf, I have a feeling of a very affectionate feeling towards the characters in this book. I have a feeling that you have a very affectionate feeling toward the characters in this book. And perhaps you are like Cloudmaker. You create these beings and then you find yourself loving them. And I wanted to ask you if you love all your characters.
I do. I have to say, I find it difficult to be a satirical writer. I enjoy that novelistic tradition. I think that's part of the useful work that novels do. But in my case, when you're going to spend 6 or 7 years with a story, I have to say, my own experiences of India and especially of life in this decade have involved huge amounts of new relationships and friendships and knowledge, including with people such as yourself. And I often feel, especially within the Indian English novel tradition, that we are very critical of what is happening in our country today, and there are many things to be critical about. I think personally we live in a smaller India today than at any time in the last 35 or 40 years. But there's so many wonderful things also happening much lower down in Indian society that are only unique to our time in history. And I actually sincerely feel like 1,000 years on, people will envy us a moment in history in India today. This generation of Indians in the first century, between 1947 and the first 5 decades of the 21st century. So to give voice to those stories, I think for me, this is something very interesting, including at the level of gender. Indians today are working out how to love also in a different way, across religion, past their families. And these are the kind of stories I want to tell. And when you see people working so hard for each other, whatever mistakes they make, I don't think one can be so harsh.
Yeah.
You can't be so harsh, so cruel, like Cloudmaker's parents.
That's right. You are always generous, I think, to your characters. Well, let's give a round
I want to thank you all for coming today.
Yeah. Thank you, Chandrahas.